Good morning. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Hello.
Yay. So welcome to the 2022 New Jersey Local News Summit. We're so excited that you are here with us today. We have a really jam-packed day full of groundbreaking, innovative, and inspiring presentations from folks all over the Garden State. And we are so grateful that you're going to spend some time with us. We know folks will be jumping in and out today from different Zoom sessions that they want to see. That's totally fine. Also, we welcome you just to keep us open in the background while you're doing other work today and listen as you can. This year, the New Jersey Local News Summit is co-presented by us here at Montclair State University at the Center for Cooperative Media, along with the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists. And the president, Ken Burns, is here with us today, and he'll speak in just a moment.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. I'm excited for all the speakers and the wonderful lineup that we have. Thank you all again for joining us. As we come together for a half day of presentations, lightning talks, we encourage you to follow the center and follow NJSPJ on Twitter and use the hashtag LNS22 to share insights and takeaways from this year's summit. We'll post links in the chat as well.
Lots of links in the chat today.
We got to do a couple of thank yous before we get underway. We'd like to thank our core funders for their continued support that make these events possible. That includes the Democracy Fund, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, and the Abrams Foundation.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much to those funders, because without your support, the center couldn't do what it does to support journalists across the Garden State and do convenings, gatherings, and events like this. So now let's turn it over to our co-presenter, Ken Burns from the New Jersey Society for Professional Journalists. Ken, welcome.
Thank you for having me. And on behalf of the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists, we are proud to co-present this Local News Summit this year with Montclair State University and the Center for Cooperative Media. You'll find at least two themes reinforced today: the importance of news coverage in a diverse, densely populated state, a good state for news that is often undercovered, and keep in mind, we are between two of the biggest markets in the country. The other theme is the importance of covering the Garden State with integrity and accountability. Our organization held its award ceremony this past weekend. By the way, congratulations to all the winners if you're on the summit. Our keynote speaker was Walt Kane of News 12, and he made a point that has stuck with me for nearly a week now. We have to be held accountable. We demand accountability from those we interview, whether it's a government official or someone on the street. We expect them to tell us the truth. But we also need to be truthful of where we are as an industry, whether it's our newsroom and our coverage, whether it's representative of the communities that we report to and the communities that we cover. Along the way, you'll see some great New Jersey journalists doing some great work, keeping our state informed, and we'll also learn about how we can improve upon the work that we do. So I'm excited. Cassandra, Stefanie, I know you're excited, so I'm gonna turn it back to you in New Jersey.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So now on to our first session. It's a keynote conversation about one of New Jersey's newest statewide nonprofit news organizations. The New Jersey Monitor has broken significant stories and made a splash since it launched during the pandemic as one of the newest nonprofits in the state. Editor Terrence T. McDonald is here today to discuss what it's been like to helm the organization in the midst of a pandemic and intense political polarization, and share what he sees for the future of New Jersey's media landscape. Please welcome Terrence T. McDonald, editor of the New Jersey Monitor, and our host, Ambreen Ali, founder of Central Desi.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to introduce Terrence McDonald. I think he's somebody who needs no introduction in the New Jersey news ecosystem. Terrence is a longtime journalist who is at the Jersey Journal, and he's known for writing stories with impact. He has truly made a mark on, the political landscape of New Jersey through his reporting, and that's work that he's continuing at the New Jersey Monitor. So I'm very excited to introduce him so he can tell us about what it's been like to be at the helm of that, and then we'll just have a little bit of a chat when he's done. Terrence.
Great, thanks. That was super embarrassing, but I appreciate the introduction. First, I want to thank everybody at the Center for Cooperative Media for inviting me to speak. I'm flattered and excited, and I'm a little bit confused that I'm the one doing this. It feels like just yesterday I was covering planning board meetings in Montclair, and Now I'm being asked for my thoughts on the future of New Jersey's media landscape, so it's sort of wild still. I've been part of that landscape for 2 decades, currently as editor, like everyone said, of New Jersey Monitor, which is a nonprofit news site. We launched last summer. We're part of State's Newsroom, which is a nationwide network of 30 newsrooms focused on state government and politics. They're about to launch their 31st site in Kentucky, and it's really exciting to be a part of a media company that is growing and not shrinking. I wanted to start by chatting about some worrying news out of Fairleigh Dickinson University that you guys might have heard about. The FDU poll asked New Jerseyans recently for their thoughts on local media and found that just 12% say local media is doing a good job covering important issues and holding powerful officials accountable. 35% say media does a fair job, and 41% say a poor job. And there is a partisan divide here, but it's not quite as wide as you would think. 5% of Republicans say local media is doing a good job versus 19% of Democrats. For starters, I'd like to note that while trust in the media has obviously dive-bombed in recent decades, nobody ever really liked us. If you watch movies from the 30s and 40s, reporters are often portrayed as drunks with no scruples. There's a scene in His Girl Friday, a movie where reporters are the heroes, where a group of reporters phone in dispatches to their editors about an event the audience has just witnessed, and they all lie about what they just saw. And even after Watergate, the media's best rating in an annual Gallup poll on trust and confidence in the media came in 1976, when just 54% of Americans said that the media does a fair job. So not great. Obviously, there's a problem here, and it's not just with CNN and Fox News. Trust in media at the local level has eroded too. So the question is, can we fix it? And I think that we can. And another question is, how do we fix it? And I'm not quite sure, but I have some thoughts that I'd like to share. For starters, I think that moving away from the traditional revenue model is going to be helpful and necessary. Advertisers obviously have found better and cheaper ways to reach customers than full-page newspaper ads. Readers have found free ways to find quality news, and our elected officials have found ways to communicate with their constituents and voters without using the media as a go-between. So running newsrooms like we're still in the golden age of newspapers is sort of silly. Second, I think we need to re-examine what we consider news. News organizations routinely debase their product, I think, in the never-ending chase for cheap clicks. I love entertainment news, but Kim Kardashian showing up the American Dream Mall or Bruce Springsteen taking a selfie on the Manasquan Boardwalk is not news. And I also love food news, but it's not news every time the guy from Barstool Sports comes to New Jersey to eat pizza. I think if you want readers to see you as a trusted source of news, you should give them news and don't make them wade through clickbait to find it. People would open porn if you put it on their homepages. If you put it on your homepages, that doesn't mean that you should. The partisan divide is a deeper problem and one I don't know how we can fix. There's a segment of the population that believes reporters are not only liberal, but act in a way that helps Democrats and hurts Republicans on purpose. And I don't know if we will ever change the minds of a lot of these folks. I think my friends in the media err sometimes by dismissing everyone who thinks this way of being a part of the lunatic fringe. There's a conservative who chats with me occasionally, on Twitter, who says the media's coverage of COVID-related nursing home deaths under the current Democratic governor in New Jersey was a fraction of its coverage of the Bridgegate scandal involving our most recent Republican governor. And honestly, it's hard to argue with him that he's wrong. There's been solid, important reporting on nursing home deaths from reporters like Sue Livio and Scott Fallon, among others. But Bridgegate received wall-to-wall coverage in a way that I don't think nursing home deaths did. And I think that's sort of indicative of the problem. A potential solution is maybe to stop endorsing political candidates. I've worked in newsrooms long enough to know that because an editor endorses, say, Mikey Sherrill for Congress doesn't necessarily mean that editor demands positive coverage of Mikey Sherrill. But most readers don't know that. And I think for the average person, it seems plausible that news coverage of candidates is colored by the editor's endorsements. In our most recent election, the 2 big media organizations that dominate the state issued endorsements in 4 major House races, and they were all for the Democrats. Those all may have been the right choices, but I think they leave readers who aren't Democrats with the idea that we're all in the tank for Democrats no matter what. So I think an easy way to signal to all readers that your news organization doesn't favor any one side of the political divide is not support anybody specifically before Election Day. I'm still new at this running a newsroom thing. So, but these are some of the things that I think about as like every day as we embark on another day of news and try to figure out what to cover and what not to cover. And these are the things I think about as we, continue to build our audience. I don't want to drone on too long, and I think a dialogue is always more interesting than monologue. So, Ambreen, I know that you have some questions, so I thought maybe we could go to that and carry on the conversation that way.
Yeah, that sounds great. And like any good reporter, I sent Terrence a bunch of questions, and now I'm tempted to go off script. So I hope that's okay.
Great, yeah.
I think I'm thank you, Joe. You designed it. Thank you. He likes my shirt. Some people tell me it looks like I spilled something on myself. So Terrence, I really want to ask you about this transition from being reporter to editor first, just because that is kind of a big shift. And as you just pointed out, you're thinking a lot about how to do news effectively. And as reporters, we're really kind of just on the ground getting the stories, right? So how has that shift been for you? And what have you sort of brought to this as a result of being a reporter first?
So the shift has been sort of strange. I hadn't sort of embarked on I hadn't had in my mind when I was a reporter, I would love to get into editing. When the state's newsroom people came to me and said, hey, would you think about doing this? I thought, okay, yeah, sure, why not? One of the things I've been trying to keep in mind is that, sometimes I knew as a reporter, it would frustrate me when I would have editors who sort of didn't trust my news judgment on a story. And so I try to keep that in mind as I chat with the reporters in our newsroom about story ideas that they have, and keep in mind that we're all sort of experts at this, and we're all New Jersey residents, and we might differ on how important a news story is. But that's sort of one thing that I've tried to keep in mind as a new editor is to have a lot of faith in the reporters and how they want to report a story.
Is there anything that reporters don't get, like a common gripe that reporters have, that now that you're sitting in the decision-making chair, you're like, oh, now I get it?
I don't know if there's something that reporters don't get, but something that I think I did not fully realize was how difficult it is to start every day and not always have an idea of what's going to happen that day, and whether there's enough news to go to 5 or 6 o'clock, or enough news for the next day. So that's probably something that I didn't really have to think about before, but now I do.
Yeah. That's great. So you mentioned not doing clickbait articles, and obviously a lot of for-profit newsrooms have to get clicks in order to get ad revenues. So tell me about what it's like to be in a nonprofit newsroom, and whether you think this is a model that will work for every newsroom, or is there specific criteria to consider when you're to go nonprofit?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know that because the people who are my bosses are interested in news, like how we view news, not clickbaity news, like Kim Kardashian showing up at a mall. I don't have to worry about it at all, right? I don't have to see that Kim Kardashian showed up in American Dream and think, oh, we're really low on clicks today. This would be really great for us if we could this could get us to X number, and then I don't have to worry about it for the rest of the week. They're not worried about it, and so I don't have to worry about it. I don't know if that's a model that works with everybody. I get why for-profit newsrooms want to do that. I get why they think, listen, if we just write a couple of graphs about this dumb thing and it's got a celebrity in the headline, that will generate enough clicks where maybe we can just focus on legit news stories for the rest of the week. But like I said before, I think it sort of debases your product. And so even if a bunch of people are clicking on that story, I think that subconsciously, a lot of them are think less of your product as a whole, because they know that, because they go to your website and they see that the biggest story on there is some dumb celebrity story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right about that. So if not clicks, then what are sort of the metrics that you feel accountable to, or that you're using to decide whether you're being successful?
I mean, things like, are we presenting a story that maybe might not have been written if we weren't here doing it? Or are we having any impact on how government acts? Are we helping shine a light on an area of the government that has not been, that other people might not know about? Those kind of things.
And I know it's only been about a year or so since you launched, but do you feel like you've been successful? Do you want to talk about some of the stories you're really proud of?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're still new, and I'm really proud of our whole staff. I think they've all done really great. One of the stories in the last couple of months that I'm really proud of is we partnered with the Public Defender's Office to sue New Jersey to try to get some records out of them about a program that they have where so when babies are born, they get a little blood test, right, to check for specific diseases. And recently, prosecutors in New Jersey used a blood sample to tie the father of a baby to a crime. And we wanted to find out how often prosecutors are using these blood tests that they force every parent, that they force on every child who is born in New Jersey, and how often they're using them not for the purposes that they say they're using them from. And so we've written a couple of stories about this, and we partnered with the public defender to sue New Jersey to try to get more information out of the state about how widespread this practice is. So that's sort of like at least one of the more recent things we've done that I'm super proud of.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I do wonder, with a story like that, how do you sort of amplify its impact? And we can sort of talk a little bit about how you're run by State's Newsroom. And I'm curious whether, being part of this network of state news organizations kind of helps you in any way, or if you use that to sort of amplify the impact. Like a story like that sounds to me like something that would make national news. That's really interesting that that's a use case for these blood samples.
Yes, yes, and it did get picked up by a bunch of national outlets. I don't think any of the New Jersey outlets picked it up, but that's another story. Some national outlets did pick it up, and I think it was partly because the story just seems so outrageous to some people that law enforcement would take the blood sample of a baby, that they told parents, we have to take this and we won't let you out of the hospital unless you let us take this blood test. It's for the benefit of your child. That they would then use that to tie someone to a crime when they couldn't, when they tried to tie this person to a crime and couldn't otherwise, that they used his own child's blood against him. So I think that it was a mixture of the story being so outrageous and it coming at a time when people nationwide are sort of reconsidering what appropriate law enforcement is. The State's Newsroom does help amplify these stories. Sorry, mostly because we have a news from the state's website where all of these stories from the 30 different outlets are all sort of featured at various times. And so I think that partially helps. And also just the unusualness of the story helped gain some national attention.
That's great. We're going to go to audience questions in about 5 minutes. So feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can just raise your hand when we get there and ask it live. But I do have a few more for you, Terrence. So about the nonprofit newsroom. How do you make sure that you are not influenced by the donors that give to a nonprofit newsroom? I think that's a question that people always have, is the person paying the bills, regardless of what revenue model you have, can exert some influence. So what does that firewall look like in a nonprofit newsroom?
So talking to editors from some of the other outlets in our company, it seems like we all sort of have different ways of handling fundraising. What State's Newsroom told me when I was hired was, listen, we take care of the fundraising. Outside of you sending a couple of emails to your subscribers, to our readers, a couple of emails every year saying, hey, it's Giving Tuesday, or it's this other day, please consider donating. They said, you don't have to take any more of an active role than that. And what I decided to do, that at least for this first year or so, is to not do that, because I wanted to focus on this new role since it was so new to me. And so I legitimately don't even know who some of the big donors are. And I know that the state's newsroom people, and if you go on their website, they do have the list of donors, so you can find them. The state's newsroom people never tell me, hey, we think you should do this, or hey, we think you should do that. So I sort of know personally that there's sort of this firewall, because they never tell me, hey, you have to do this story. There's not even a hint of it. There's not even a hint where they say, hey, maybe you consider doing this. And I think to myself, this sounds like something a donor would want. So that's sort of how I do it. And I know that as we go into our second full year next year, that I'm probably going to take a little bit more of an aggressive role in donation and fundraising, because I would like to do that to keep the site alive. I don't know. I'm just going to be honest with people that, you should consider donating, and donating is to help fund local news, but you're not going to get anything from it. And that may sound sort of fantastical, but that's sort of how it works in for-profit newsroom tubes, or it's supposed to, right? That the advertising team goes out and gets dollars, but they don't really have much say over the newsroom, or that's how it's supposed to be.
And there is sort of like a civic education piece to that, right? I think that citizens understand when you explain to them the importance of having an independent media that isn't beholden to interests, and how that fosters democracy. And I think that getting that sort of message out is really key. Yeah, you're right that people don't trust the media, but I think as we sort of see attacks on our democracy, and we sort of see like, this is not like just something we take for granted. This is something we have to reinforce. Do you think the case for having media is, like, just in your conversations, like with the person you mentioned on Twitter, like, do you think that people get it when they really think about it?
Yes, I think they do. I think that people do get it when you sort of, especially when you have one-on-one conversations. It's always harder to be sort of a flamethrower when you're just speaking to one person or to two people, as opposed to like going Twitter or Facebook and like blasting a message out. I think people do get that, and I knew when I was at the for-profit newsrooms, when the paywall models started coming in, that there were definitely some readers who griped about the fact that, oh, I can't read this story because it's behind a paywall. But there were also readers who understood and said, listen, this is an investigative story, and you have to pay reporters and photographers, and they have to earn a living wage. And so it makes sense to pay to read a story that took a lot of time to write and a lot of resources to write. So there are people who don't get it, but I think there are people that do as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's talk a little bit about collaboration. We talked a little offline about how it can be wasteful for everybody to chase the same story once like news is broken. But then the way that our newsrooms work, sometimes it's tempting to say like, oh, so-and-so has this story on Murphy, and like, now we need this story as well.
Yes.
How can newsrooms do a better job of kind of, working together, not kind of reinventing the wheel in each newsroom? And, how do you see your role as a newsroom in the larger New Jersey news ecosystem?
I think that in like the golden age of newspapers, pre-internet, it made sense for if the Daily News got some big scoop, for the New York Post or the New York Times to go out and chase it and present it to their readers, because sometimes a person who loved the Daily News would only buy the Daily News. And if you love the Times, you only bought the Times. And so you would want to tell readers, this is an important story, and the Daily News got there first, but we're presenting it to you because it's important. I think that's less important now, because you can, outside of like, unless, when you're not taking consideration that some stories are paywalled, if there's a big story about Phil Murphy and you can go find it on NJ.com, what's the purpose of having every other reporter for every other outlet in New Jersey chase that same story and present that same story to everybody? I think it makes a lot less sense in 2022 than it did, 40 or 50 years ago. And so it's tempting when there's a big story that drops. It's tempting as an editor to, I want to say, Dana, here's the story from NJ.com and it's important and we should present it to our readers, so go chase it. But then part of me is thinking, what's the purpose? Dana might be working on an original story that nobody else has, and I'm taking her away from that to go chase some story that everybody else has already read if they want to. And so I get the temptation, but I also think that it's probably more important to let your reporters go find the story that they want to find.
Yeah, that's great. I do see a lot of great questions coming into the chat. I think my last question for you is just what keeps you going, and are you optimistic about, what the next year will look like for NJ Monitor? What are you excited about? I just want to kind of end on a high note because I know often that's a challenge.
I brought all the doom and gloom. Yeah, I'm optimistic. We just had an editor summit in DC a couple of months ago where we talked about sort of the future of the company, and everybody there is really positive and they have great plans for expansion in the future. And it's sort of refreshing because it always, whenever we would have like big meetings at my prior jobs, it would always be like, oh no, what are they about to announce to us? And it was very often we're cutting this or we're cutting that or we're laying these people off. And so it's sort of refreshing to be around like an environment where the bosses are like, we feel really great, and here's our plans to expand in the future. So yeah, I'm super excited. I hope I am very positive about sort of where this is going.
Awesome. Well, knock on wood. All right. So Stefanie had the first question. She said, I am curious to know more about raising money. How much does the newsroom get involved in fundraising at the Monitor? I know you talked a little bit about that, but I don't know if you want to elaborate.
Sure. I mean, I don't personally do a lot of fundraising now, but I plan to do that more in our second full year next year. I know that I've talked to other editors in the other states newsrooms who are very aggressive about doing it. One of the editors says that every time she's talking to somebody who compliments the site, she says, "Great, how about throwing us like $50 or $100 or $500 or $600?" I think it sort of depends on how comfortable the editor is with asking people for money, which is always super awkward. But I'm personally not doing it right now, but that's going to change.
And to what extent do you think about diversifying kind of your revenue streams? Is that part of the conversation?
Currently not, but that will be a part of it once I start like getting super aggressive about doing it. Yeah.
Great. Let me ask you a question from Katrina Janko. How does Terrence feel about the both sides journalism debate? How does one go about being fair and accurate without normalizing hatred or extremism in local news?
That's a tough one because like I understand not wanting to say, quote, this like lunatic lawmaker who spouts all sort of lies about election results or immigration or what have you. But I also see the benefit in sort of letting people know this is what this person thinks. But it's a struggle to figure out how to present it in the right way. And I don't know if I have or anyone else, frankly, has perfected how to do that. I noticed that very recently, this sort of subject came up very recently when Donald Trump announced he was running for president. And there was a lot of criticism over how various media organizations presented it, right? Like the Washington Post just from the get-go said, I'm paraphrasing here, but Donald Trump, who like incited an erection on the Capitol because he denied he lost the last election, is running for president again. Whereas I think the New York Times was way more sort of like neutral about it. So I wish I had a better answer than I don't know, but I think it also comes down to like very specific, like a case-by-case basis, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like a gut feeling that you kind of have to think through each time, right? I know that's a conversation that comes up a lot, just sort of where is the line and how do you define it?
Like very recently, sorry to interrupt, but very recently, this is sort of hate speech, but very recently, the chair of the New Jersey Republican Party got in trouble because at an election night party, he used an expletive to describe Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. And so Dana was there and wrote the story and included it. And in my head, I thought, is this benefiting anybody that it's in here? Yes, it's pointing out that this guy said it, and maybe his critics would like to know that he said it, but also it was gross and it was sort of like pointless. So we sort of had that internal dialogue at that moment. Should we include this or should we not include it? Because it's hateful, it's gross, it's dumb, and it's also, is it relevant enough to keep? I ended up cutting it, but I see why other news outlets would want to highlight it, because it shows that it sort of revealed what this guy really thinks at a specific moment.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if context is really the most important thing when something like that is shared. I almost think I admire the New York Times a little bit for it kind of like pulling back the curtain and showing people how they do their reporting. And I know when we were talking about the cost of doing investigative reporting, that sort of came in my mind, the idea that when you educate people on what it takes to do an investigative piece and how much it costs, then they can understand the revenue piece. And also when we decide to share something that looks hateful, kind of explaining why it's worth sharing or why that decision was made can sometimes be the difference between just letting it stand on its own and kind of fostering a debate around it.
Sure. I just realized that I probably have a better answer for that fundraising question from before, which was when I send out these emails, these occasional emails asking people, hey, would you like to donate? One of the things I did last year was say, we sued the state for records this year, and it cost this much. So, I sent Dana to this place to report on a story, and it cost her this much to get there, to sort of show people like varying amounts and like how much $50 can help even, or how much like $1,000 can help, and what we would do with the money if we get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of related, but I'll just ask, Stefanie had asked, how does Terrence feel about pro-democracy coverage? Stefanie, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, or Terrence, you want to just take it?
No, you can interpret it however you may.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm in favor, I guess. I mean, we have States Newsroom has a democracy reporter so one of the things that States Newsroom is 30, right now it's 30 newsrooms that focus on state house government, but we also have a national team in Washington, D.C., and two other reporters outside of Washington, D.C. who are writing about sort of national issues that all of the local newsrooms can pick up and post if they want to. And one of those national reporters does focus on democracy issues, and like wrote a story about like how many election deniers were running for office just in the most recent elections, and then later wrote a story about how many of them won versus how many of them lost. I think that's sort of important thing to do nationally. I don't know how many local stories there are like New Jersey based in that sort of field. Although I do encourage, like Nikita, one of our reporters, is really like well educated on all the different voting laws in New Jersey and how much they've shifted. So, I sort of encourage him. He doesn't need much encouragement to do this, but I encourage him to sort of like keep everybody informed about what the voting rights, what the voting laws are now, and when they're looking to change them and why they're looking to change them, et cetera.
That's great. We have a question from Lewis Hockman. He says, Terrence has one of the most voicey voices on Twitter I have the pleasure of following. Where do you see the line between rightfully calling BS on bad faith statements and seeming to suggest your own bias? And how do you see an argument for or against treading carefully, even on saying things you can defend, to avoid appearance of bias? It's a great question about social media.
That is a great question. So it's become less of an issue now that I'm an editor and don't report a lot of straight news. And most if I'm writing something with a byline, it's usually commentary. And so I think it's become less of an issue now, because I'm sort of like, I feel like I could be more publicly biased, right? Because like I'm not doing a lot of straight news reporting. As for before, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of surprised I didn't get more like, hey, we saw your tweet, can you please delete that, calls from my editor? But there you have it. I don't know what the line is. I've always just thought of Twitter as sort of being just sort of like a dumb place to be funny, as opposed to like a serious, like a pillar of democracy. And so there probably are tweets where if I looked at them back now, I'd be like, I probably shouldn't have tweeted that, because it sort of like revealed my bias about a specific issue I was writing about. But I don't know. I'm probably just too quick with my Twitter trigger finger. I don't even know if that answers your question. So sorry, Lou, but.
I'm curious if you think about the Twitter feeds of your reporters too. Do you give them any guidance on how to navigate that?
No, I don't. I sort of trust them to. I mean, I follow them, so I see what they tweet, and I knew of Nikita's and Sophie's reporting before we started this because we were all New Jersey reporters. I didn't know about Dana's because she covered Philly a lot, so I wasn't following her. So I never really saw a tweet of theirs and thought, oh, that would be objectionable or they're revealing too much. And I don't now. I just sort of they're adults and they know what they're doing. And nobody so far has complained to me and said, Sophie wrote this on Twitter, and I don't think that's really fair for her to say that. So it just hasn't come up. And I haven't seen anything that they've tweeted yet that I think I should really talk to them about that.
That's really insightful. Does anybody want to raise a hand and ask a question? I have a couple more in the chat, but I'd love to give people an opportunity. Just feel free to raise your hand as I ask this next one. So Gannett just announced that there will be more layoffs on December 1st. So do you think that nonprofits like yours can pick up some of the loss of local coverage that might result?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I told the state's newsroom people when they called me first and said, hey, we're thinking about opening in New Jersey. What do you think? One of the things I said was that I know that in other states, state house reporting is sometimes vanished in some states, but here in New Jersey, there are fewer state house reporters than there used to be, but it's still pretty robust. Everybody's doing really great work. But unfortunately, there have been layoffs, and where there haven't been layoffs, there have been people who have quit and those jobs just haven't been filled. And so, yeah, obviously, if Gannett is slashing jobs, then it's, an outlet like ours becomes more important because we'll still be at the State House at this hearing or that hearing or talking to this lawmaker or that lawmaker or highlighting bills that have been introduced where they just can't because they're losing too many people.
That's great. I don't see any hands raised, so I'm going to ask another question from my list. What has been sort of some of the biggest challenges you've faced since you've launched?
I mean, some of the biggest challenges are just that, it feels like we have a really small newsroom. There's myself and 3 reporters. And sometimes it feels like there's just a torrent of news. And it's just, one of the challenges is sort of starting the day and looking at what's happening and thinking, how do we as 4 people do all of this? Sometimes there are those days when it doesn't feel like anything's happening and you wonder, how is there even work enough for 4 people? But there's a lot of news going on in New Jersey, and that's one of the big challenges.
Yeah.
I have one last question.
Oh, great.
Who is the funniest New Jersey politician that you have to cover?
Declan O'Scanlan is probably the funniest, the most naturally funny. I never feel like he's really sweating to make a joke. So he's probably and
who's the most unintentionally funny?
No comment. There's too many.
Touché.
It's almost all of the rest of them are tied for that.
We have a question
too. He's pretty funny.
Oh, Bill Pascrell.
I see that from Lou. Bill Pascrell's Twitter is really funny. I just don't know necessarily if Bill Pascrell is writing all those. So his Twitter is really funny, but I think one of the things that we as reporters make the mistake is sort of ascribe every tweet to the person whose handle it is. And I don't think Bill Pascrell is writing those. Although he's pretty funny. I don't think he's that funny.
That's so funny. Vanessa Graver asks, communities of color and people experiencing poverty often are the folks most impacted by bad policies, corruption, and disinformation. How do you serve those audiences through your coverage and make the information accessible to them?
I mean, I think that one of the things that we do, and it's not like I'm doing this, this is sort of the company policy, is that all of the news is available for free no matter what, and they're never putting anything behind a paywall. So that's one of the things that we do, is that it's always going to be free. So no matter what your income level is, you can always read whatever story we have. And another thing that we do is we make every story that we publish available to any newspaper that wants to publish it. They can do it free of charge. They don't have to ask permission. They just have to follow a couple of guidelines that are obvious. Like, you have to give us credit, obviously, and you can't put it behind a paywall, because that's one of our company policies is nothing behind a paywall. And so, there's a lot of tiny little papers out there that don't have the staff to cover statewide news or news that's coming out of the state house. And so they can just take anything we have and just post it if they want to. And I think that's sort of another thing. Like, I can't force them to, but we make it available. And I think that's sort of another thing we can do to sort of get to as wide of an audience as possible. We also do a lot. We don't do every story, but we translate into Spanish a lot of stories, and obviously make those available to any Spanish language newspaper that wants them.
That's great. Jordan Reese is asking, are there any sustainability models for journalism out there that you believe show promise for growing New Jersey coverage? Yours, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, here's the thing. It's really hard to tell the future, and it's even harder to tell the future about this industry. So I don't know. I'm hopeful that the nonprofit model is the one that's sustainable, because I think that, in real bad economic times, it will be harder. Actually, it will be harder, obviously, to get people to donate money if they're struggling. But I think it's easier to get people to donate money when your pitch is always, we would like you to donate because local news is important and we need you to survive. I think it's easier to get money out of people at bad times that way than to sort of squeeze advertisers for money when they know that the customers aren't there the way they used to be.
And then Meg is asking, where does your mothership get its funding? I love all these questions coming in. We're probably going to have to wrap up there.
If you Google, I'm doing it right now. Obviously I can't just say what the URL is, because that's crazy. But if you Google States Newsroom donors, you can see the list of them.
Excellent, and that one just got dropped in the chat. So Terrence, I think.
Oh, great, perfect. Yeah, never even occurred to me to do that.
Yeah, no worries. We will wrap it up there. I just want to thank you so much for your time and candidness and your willingness to answer all these questions and let us pick your brain about the monitor. We're super excited about the direction that things are going to go. And Stefanie and Cassandra, I'll kick it back to you guys.